this computer. Cool. Okay, let me share just this, and then you can start in a second. Cool. Awesome. So welcome to LCS. I am the graduate advisor for LCS, Latinx in computer science. Today we're hosting Professor Hoeim in one of our most popular talks so far this semester. He will be talking to us about how to thrive in the research community. Professor Hoeim is one of the professors in computer vision, I believe, here in UIUC. He has he had a really awesome talk in improving your research skills when I was a student there last year, and he was kind to share his knowledge with us again. So please welcome Professor Hoeim. So now he'll share his screen.
Okay, thank you. So can you guys see it? You can see the full screen. So look good?
Yes, it looks good to me.
Okay. So just to tell you a little bit about myself. So I grew up in upstate New York. I went to undergrad at Buffalo. I did electrical engineering and computer science. Then I did some research at an optics lab. I didn't really know that much what I wanted to do for a PhD, although I was always interested in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so I went to, the reason that I went to graduate school at all is that I realized that like the stuff that you could do with a bachelor's degree was kind of boring for me. And I wanted to do like more interesting problems. So I went to Carnegie Mellon and I did my PhD in robotics there. And then I came to Illinois here in 2009, or actually 2007. And I did a Beckman Fellowship, and then I've been a professor here since 2009. And my research is in computer vision. I've also done a startup by Reconstruct, which is still going. So I'm the chief scientist there, and I started that a few years ago. All right, so this talk was originally made for this class that Professor Shah teaches on how to do research. So lots of people come in to the class and give their own perspectives on how to be an effective researcher and how to do well in the PhD program. So I'm going to talk kind of generally about my principles to thrive, and I like to think of it as how do you thrive being part of the research community. So there's a few, when you think about your research, instead of thinking of it as an individual endeavor, you think about it as part of an entire research community. It kind of changes the way that you think about success, and it thinks about the way that it changes the way that you plan your research program. So one of the key principles is when choosing a research direction, be part of the team. So one part of that is what I think of as don't crowd the ball. This video will probably only partly work on Zoom, but I think you'll get the idea. In this is soccer. There's a yellow team, red team. You can see the red team is like not working that well together. They're all running at the ball. So they're always, all the players are always within a few feet of the ball. And the yellow team is doing a good job. They all have their positions, they're spread out. And so as a result, the ball spends almost all the time down by the red team's goal. When they get it away very briefly, then the yellow team's in position to take it away again and kick it back. So I think there's actually, you can think about research this way too, that there's lots of different research problems that we can work on. Some people are better suited to some problems than others. But there's going to be like very popular topics at any given time. And you don't want everybody working on the same popular topic because you're just going to end up duplicating your efforts. So one thing that I think about when I'm trying to come up with a research problem, or when I'm considering working in a particular direction, I think about like, what is my unique perspective or angle in this research? So like, do you have some kind of background that makes you particularly well suited to make progress here? Or is it a topic that you think that other people are not really paying enough attention to that needs more effort? Or, you know, are you able to bring your own expertise to bear somehow? also you can think about like, how can this research influence others? So sometimes a research direction by itself does not seem that exciting. Like if you're working on a data set, or you're working on a new way to evaluate algorithms, then nobody will say that's a particularly clever piece of research usually. But efforts like that, because it enables others to do better research, can have a lot of influence in the community. So an example of each of these, so for unique perspective or angle, so like one thing is that when I finished my PhD, I was thinking about like different research directions that I could pursue. One of the more obvious directions is to continue my PhD work. So my PhD work was in single view 3D scene understanding. I had been working in that area longer than most other people, since not many people were doing it when I started. And so that was something where I had a lot of expertise. And so it's obvious that if I continue in it, I have some advantage compared to other people who might not know the background yet and haven't already been thinking about it for years. Another one was, another research direction that I decided to pursue early on was like attribute-based recognition. And I was just thinking about like how at the time, everybody thought about object detection or object classification as essentially a problem of given an image, you assign it to a number that corresponds to a category, or given an image, you put a bunch of boxes in the image and assign numbers to them that correspond to different objects. And I thought that seemed like a really simplistic representation of scenes, that if you took away the name, which means nothing to the computer, and you just put the boxes with numbers on them, then it would feel like the computer has no understanding of that scene. And so I thought that there was like a gap where people weren't thinking about how these objects related to each other, so that when you're learning new object categories, you should be able to relate them to categories you already know, and so on. So that was like a slightly different angle than what other people were thinking about. And in terms of the research influence, an example is I did a paper once on object detection analysis. So it's just basically like, how do you look at the results of your object detector and analyze like what your detector is good at and what it's bad at. That paper actually got rejected like 2 times. And the second time I didn't make any changes. I changed like literally 1 sentence before I resubmitted it. But then it got accepted, and then it's been very, a lot of people like it, and it's gotten a lot of citations, and a lot of people use it to figure out like how their changes have made a difference in the performance. So that's like an example of something that's it doesn't look interesting, and so that's why it got rejected, but it can still make a difference. It can make a big difference. And then the third part is that sometimes you should, so generally, like I tend to be wary of working on a topic if it's extremely popular, if lots of other people are doing it, because then it's really hard to answer like, why am I better at this than everybody else? But sometimes you happen to be working in an area that suddenly becomes very popular, you have unique expertise. And in that case, you're the one that should be on the ball. And so you shouldn't be afraid of working on that topic. Another kind of principle that I keep in mind when I'm coming up with a research topic is to aim ahead of my target. And by the way, feel free to interrupt me at any point, since I can't see anybody's face when I'm presenting, so I have no feedback. But go ahead and just chime in if you have any questions or anything. So
yeah, the chat is also a good place to commit to comment if you guys have any comments, etc.
Yeah. Okay, sure. So aiming ahead of the target is another thing I keep in mind. So this is basically, sometimes the way that I think about a research problem is, well, so first I'll go with the analogy. So when you're playing soccer or basically any other sport, if you're passing a ball, you don't pass it to where the player is currently standing. you pass it ahead of them. So when they keep running, they'll reach the ball at the right moment, or they'll reach like the path of the ball at the right moment. If you pass it, if the person in yellow passes it to where the yellow player currently is, then they're going to have to like turn around, or they'll miss the pass. It's the same with research. So it takes a while to do research. It takes a year or so to get a paper done. And so a few years really to work on to make any progress, significant progress in a particular direction usually. So sometimes I think about I think about like where the field currently is, like where I think we might be able to get in 5 or 10 years, and or basically like where our current like trajectory is like naturally evolving. So for example, if maybe we've made a lot of progress in like vision language embeddings in my field. And so like what new things will this enable in a few years? If we then are able to tackle those new problems in a few years, what will be the big gaps according to what we currently have? So maybe I think we will be able to do like visual dialogue with video, and like self-training from video and captions, etc. So then you can think about like what are the missing pieces in that problem that nobody's really working on today, and then start working on those missing pieces, so that by the time you make progress in it, it's going to enable new applications, or it's going to be just in time to contribute to these new research directions that are enabled by the things that people are working on right now. So the last one is really more of an attitude thing. It's not about finding a research problem, but I think this is important for peace of mind and mental health when you're working in research, because there's research, sometimes research doesn't turn out well. There's a lot of ups and downs. Even when a project goes well overall, when it's successful, there's always a lot of moments when it's not going well. And you might work on something for a long time, and somebody else ends up doing something very similar and publishing it right before you, or there's a lot of things that can happen. And if you're focused entirely on your own success, that can be extremely frustrating. But if you think about it as that you're contributing to a broader community, and that whenever, as research progresses in community, it's also like your win, like you're part of that effort as well. Even if you're not, even if you're not the player that hit the home run, you're still on the team. And so you can celebrate the wins of your community. So in my case, like when the field of computer vision moves forward, I feel happy about it, even if I didn't really do anything very useful for that step forward. And there'll be other times where I did feel like I, at least in some small way, contributed to that progress. But I think that thinking about it this way makes it much easier to get through frustrations, and to avoid a competitive feeling where you're worried that other people might end up doing the same work as you, but better, or something like that. So that's about choosing a research direction, and about being satisfied with your research. Another aspect of being a successful researcher is being able to write papers and review papers. And so I just have a couple of tips in those directions. Really, the main tip is to focus on the potential to teach in both reviewing and in writing. So as an author, try to keep in mind that your aim is to teach and inspire, not impress. So it can be easy to want to try to impress people with your work and how good your results are and how interesting your method is. But in the end, what people want is to learn, and that's really the value of a paper. So that's really what that affects is kind of the tone of the paper, and it also affects how you organize your writing. So when I'm writing a paper, when I'm about to write a paper, I try to think about like what did I learn from this project? And what could somebody else learn from it that they would value? And try to organize the paper around those teachings. So instead of as a counterexample, you could think of it as like, what improvement did I get, and what things did I do to get that improvement? But it might be that some of those things that you did are might be that that may cause you to focus on the details that other people may not be interested in, for example. So focus on the teaching and inspiration rather than the results, or on trying to like convince other people that the paper should be accepted. So as a reviewer, likewise, I think being a good reviewer requires a lot of humility, because we all have problems that we think are very interesting, and other people have different problems that they think are interesting. And I think as a reviewer, you need to kind of put aside your own biases and interests and try to evaluate a paper on its own merits and whether the paper can teach anything. So I try to think about, can this paper teach, let's assume, maybe I'm not interested in the topic, but assume that somebody else is. Does the paper have something that it can teach them? Does it discover something new? Does it have a new idea? Does it evaluate it? Are the conclusions justified, and so on? And to try avoid putting too much weight on novelty or interestingness, which often has more to do with the reviewer than with the paper itself. So like one example is, basically the reason for that is people often don't know what directions will make the biggest impact. And often the most novel papers counterintuitively are thought to be not very original, because they're working in a very different direction than other people, and so one that they're not really thinking about. So an example is like the David Lowe's 1999 SIF paper, which I don't know how many citations it has now, maybe 20,000 or something, was actually a poster, which is like the lower tier of acceptance in the computer vision conferences. So probably the most one of the single highest cited papers was a poster, and nobody even came to the poster. He was just like standing by himself there. That's what I heard. So sometimes people don't really know what's going to be a big deal and what's not going to be a big deal. And so when you're reviewing, just try to focus on, does it teach you something new? And then the third major piece of advice is to grow and adapt in your career. So as part of that, we want to, you should try to avoid becoming root bound. So root bound is shown on the right side there. If you put a plant in a pot and you let it, like, water it and feed it and let it grow there for a long time, and then the plant gets too big for the pot, but you keep on watering it and feeding it, the problem is that there's not enough soil for its roots. So all the roots like kind of grow and get locked in together, and the plant can't grow anymore, and it even starts to die. So to avoid becoming root bound, you need to take the plant and put it in a bigger pot as it continues to grow. And so in the same way, as you go through your career, you want to make sure that you keep branching out and exploring new topics and new roles. That right now, that's easy for you because you're growing quickly and you're doing PhDs, so you're establishing yourself. But after you finish your PhD, especially, you're going to often have choices about whether to continue in your current expertise or to do something new that is where you may not succeed and where you need to learn a lot or develop new skills. And you want to try to find a balance between those. So I've seen professors that basically continue doing exactly their PhD direction for their entire lives. And by the time 20 or 30 years goes by, that's not really an interesting direction to anybody else. And so it's kind of, people can get limited. The same can easily happen, even more easily, if you go into a company where you might end up, you're hired for particular expertise, and then you keep on, refining that expertise, but eventually the rest of the world moves on, and then you're an expert in something that is not that interesting anymore. So you always want to try to balance the leveraging your current skills with the with learning new things. So try to choose activities that have potential for learning as well as impact. So that's like one of the motivations for me of doing the startup, of starting Reconstruct, is that I felt like, I needed some, even though being a professor can be very challenging, I had a lot of experience with all the different things that you do with being a professor. And so I really wanted to do something new that would challenge me. And so like doing a company requires a lot of skills that are not necessarily trained in us in grad school and as a professor. So in summary, the principles to thrive are: when choosing research directions, to be part of a team; writing and reviewing, focus on the paper's ability to teach; and in your career, grow and adapt. So just very briefly, I also have some other like tips about success in PhD research. So one is that I think one thing that a lot of PhD students want to know is like, what is to kind of calibrate themselves. So like, what should I be focusing on when I come into a PhD program? Like how do I know if I'm succeeding? Because there's like a really big journey from undergrad to graduating your PhD program, where you're basically could be a professor and mentor other students. So the way that I think about it is, in the first year, you want to focus on acquiring background knowledge and basic research skills. So read lots and lots and lots of papers. You're never wasting time when you're reading papers if you're reading them carefully and learning from them. Take classes, try to attend a conference so that you get some idea of, I think that can be very motivating and help you better understand how to position research. And do a research project, but don't really worry about whether it makes good paper. Then focus on improving your research skills and proposing project ideas. Extend existing work by another student in your group maybe, or start trying to propose research directions in your main line of work, submit a paper, keep reading. Then focus on finding a major research direction and improving independence. So essentially what I see as the path in the PhD is that you start by being able to implement something that somebody else's idea. And in the mid stage, you're able to at least like develop your own approach. And by the end of the PhD, you're able to identify promising research directions, and you don't really need your advisor anymore, but it's still always helpful to talk to people and to talk to your advisor. I find it's impossible. I think it's really hard to do work completely independently, because it's really easy to kind of get off in your own space and lose the thread. So the final thing is to try to mitigate the problems that can pop up in a PhD. I think that the hardest thing about a PhD is that you only have 5 years, which may seem like a long time, but it's not really. And it's only enough time to do maybe 5 projects. And if you get stuck in one of those projects for like 2 or 3 years, then that's like half your PhD stuck in a project. So how do you avoid getting stuck? The most important thing, I think, is to vet the project before you start. So before you touch a keyboard for a research project, try to think through the whole thing and answer things like, what problem are you trying to solve? Why are you trying to solve it? What's your key idea? How is that different from existing work? How will you measure success? Write the intro. So usually I would write like a 1-page like little mini abstract or something on the project to make sure that it reads well and that other people will like it. and what's the simplest proof of concept that you can do to verify the idea. And then you want to make sure that somebody else finds that plan credible. So like, so this is the template that I give to my PhD students. I'll have to say, I don't always do this, but sometimes I do this, and I think it's effective when I do it. So I'll have everybody, if somebody wants to do a new project, fill out this template, and then the research group will discuss it. So it's essentially like the same kinds of questions that somebody would answer if they were reviewing a paper. Like, what's the problem that they solve? What's the related work? What's the overview of the method, the contributions, the significance? Do they test it effectively? And except that, of course, you haven't done the work yet. So it's basically imagining if you do the work and if it goes as planned, is this going to be like a really great paper or not? Because if not, then you shouldn't even do the work. So I think it's good to come into this with the idea that you might discard the idea. Don't come in with the idea that you're trying to like prove that this is a good research direction. If you get a bunch of, it might be good to write a couple proposals and then figure out which one seems most promising. And then I also recommend, although I have to say that I haven't managed to do this super successfully yet, is to set a date to review progress and decide whether to continue. So if you think you can do your prototype in like 6 weeks, then say like 6 weeks from now, we're going to review everything that we've done and decide, are we going to continue in this direction, pivot, or discard it and do something else? So really you really want to avoid getting stuck doing something that's only like marginally interesting, because it's a lot of time. So when you do think about, when you are like struggling and trying to decide whether to switch directions, you can think about, are you still excited about your research idea? Did your proof of concept pan out, or does it keep evolving? That's kind of a danger sign. Sometimes it's good if you learn something and then you realize you need a different approach. But if you keep on changing the goalpost in a way to so that you're not really solving the original problem you set out to solve, then you need to ask, are you still interested in solving this problem that you're addressing now? And ask, like, do you need more time to see if the result is amazing, or are you just hoping that it will be above threshold if you spend another 6 months on it? So it's basically a problem of sunk costs, that you've spent a lot of time on something, it's hard to give it up. But you can try to imagine if a friend were telling you about this project you've been working on, would you think that your friend should keep working on it, or that they should find a new research direction? And then finally, like, even if you decide that this project isn't going anywhere, which sometimes happens, or that it's just like you're not as exciting as something else, or not as, you don't think it has the same potential as something else that you could be working on, then it's good to take a few days to write up a tech report of your ideas and experiments and results. I often find that this writing process actually stimulates a lot of ideas. So when you do that, you might actually realize, oh, if I just do this, then it will actually be a pretty good paper. But in any case, you can then publish it on arXiv or put it on your website, and then other people can still learn from it, and then you feel like you've completed the project. So that's I know it's kind of a whirlwind tour, but so those are my tips on success in PhD programs and in research, and a little bit in careers. And so I'm happy to answer any questions about anything.
So there's a question in the chat.
Okay.
I'll read it, I guess.
I can see it too.
Okay.
I'll read it. It says from Pranav, I'm an MS student, similar to the timeline you gave for a PhD. How do you suggest we spend time during the MS degree? How do we get started with our thesis, and what kind of research would an MS thesis be? Okay, that's a good question. So the MS is basically it's a lot like the first year of the PhD, but it depends on what your goal is. So if your goal is to continue in a PhD program, then what you do might be a little bit different, but not just a little bit different than if your goal is to like leave and then join a company. The main difference is that if you're trying to go into a PhD program, then you kind of have some pressure to like do a research project that looks PhD worthy, in the sense that like it looks like it either that you're able to publish it, or that it's like in a direction where it looks like it would make a good paper if you had a little more time. And that you need to if you're going for a PhD in the PhD track, if you're trying to like get admitted for PhD programs, you need to work with a faculty member to be able to get a strong recommendation letter or to join their research group. So I would say like in an MS degree, you of course need to take classes. That's like a little bit more of the focus of the MS. You also need to spend a lot of time reading papers. And then I would try to get involved in a research group and start on a research project. So this could be like joining, if there's a PhD student, for example, that's already started doing a research project, then you may be able to collaborate with them and help with experiments and help with the development of that project. That's a good way to increase the chances of completing a project within your MS, because it's extremely hard to start from scratch and complete something in a 1 or even a 2-year time frame. In getting started with the thesis, I think again, looking at, I would start by just trying to understand what some of the other what other research is currently going on in areas that you're interested in, and either do something that's kind of an offshoot from that, or try to join an existing project, so that you're able to take advantage of the expertise and the interests of the other people around you. And what kind of research would an MS thesis be? It could be the same as other like PhD oriented research, where the goal is to publish a paper. If you're going to join a company, though, if your goal is to complete the MS and then to work on like advanced engineering, then it might make sense to instead focus on a more, you could focus on a practical application. You could do either, but you might just want to engineer something really well, do like a deep network application of I don't know, image captioning or whatever you're interested in, and just focus on like doing something really well rather than worrying about whether it's publishable. Does that make sense, Pranav?
Awesome. I have a question. So how do you balance like learning, and how do you say that you finished your first and second year? Because obviously the first 2 years are about taking classes and things like that. How do you sort of find time, or how do you schedule time to like get a new skill? Because you mentioned in your talk that we should also adapt. So how do you like make sure you can do that in a productive way without, while at the same time being a productive researcher? And that also includes, in parentheses, like how many papers should you, obviously you probably shouldn't be reading randomly, but how much time should you spend reading papers? What is your thoughts on that?
So yeah, so in terms of branching out, I think when you do your PhD, you're already branching out. Like you're already in a situation, while you're in the PhD program, you're already in a situation where you have so many learning opportunities and you need to learn quite a lot. And so I think the like avoiding becoming root bound, I need to let my cat out just a second. Good. So the cat like comes out of the closet and then claws my chair till I let him out. Avoiding becoming root bound, I think, becomes more of an issue after you graduate, and then it's easy to get into a role where you or to like choose research problems where you don't explore as much. But I think while you're a student, I think you learn quite a lot. In terms of reading papers, I would say most students should be reading a lot more than they do. I would spend at least like an hour and a half or 2 hours a day reading papers. And when I was a PhD student, I probably read like 100 or 200 papers in my first year, somewhat carefully. And I also, like throughout my PhD, I would usually have like papers by my bedside. So I would spend some time reading papers that I'm interested in every day. You can read papers. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Like a seminar course is a good way to force yourself to read papers. Also just like finding things that you're interested in and trying to just, spending a little time to going through like the latest best papers or talks, things like that. But especially in the beginning, I think it really does take a couple hundred papers before you get your bearings in a particular research direction. So Sarah has a question too about what do I mean when I mention a project. I guess by project, I usually mean, I think about a project in the academic setting as like that I've got a problem that I'm working on. I've got an approach that I think will like make progress on that problem or like is some, evaluatable, like novel or original idea. And at the end of the project, I will be able to write a paper and publish it. So I tend to think about projects in terms of like publishable units. Sometimes I have like when I'm writing a grant, I would have like a 4 or 5 year agenda that would be kind of broken down into different subtopics, and each of those subtopics might be a paper or two. So yeah, it's basically a potential paper that could be like a chapter of the dissertation. I think in the beginning, you probably, I think very few like master students or first year PhD students are able to chart out a long-term research direction. And even like faculty members, it's hard to know what you're going to want to do in 2 or 3 years because everything's always evolving around you. So in the beginning, I would not really worry about the longevity of the project, of your like research direction, and just try to do something that's interesting where you'll learn and get your feet wet with research. And then if you're doing a PhD, then starting around the 3rd year, you want to identify something where you could potentially do like a series of papers so that you're able to graduate and have like show some kind of cohesive, significant work.
I had a question that kind of goes along with what Brenda was asking. If you have like a broad idea, should you work on all specific instances of that idea and like try to squeeze all of the papers or projects out of an idea as possible, or should you try to just explore like a variety of things?
Well, I think it comes down to personal preference. Like people like to do different kinds of research. For myself, I would rather. So if I feel like other people will, so let's say I come up with an idea that could be applied to like 5 different applications. Probably I would not do all 5 applications. I would probably do 1 or 2 to prove out the concept. And then I would figure like if it made a big difference, then other people would probably apply it to those other topics and I don't need to worry about it. So, but on the other hand, like if you're like passionate about applying that idea to all of its applications, then that's also a perfectly fine thing to do. So I think it's hard to say in general, but personally I would rather, like, once the idea is proven, I like to move on to a new idea, because in my research I tend to be more like idea oriented than application oriented.
There is one question in the chat about doing interdisciplinary research, and it's hard to know if you're making contributions without knowing both areas well. What are your thoughts on that, Professor?
Oh yeah, I missed that. Yeah, that is tough. So I think it just takes more time. It's like how if you raise a baby in a family where people speak 2 or more different languages, it usually takes them longer to master any single language. But by the end of it, they're a polyglot and they are, able to learn new languages much more quickly, and it may improve their thinking overall. I think similarly, like when you're working in different research areas, it does take more of an investment to establish your foundation in each area. But the advantage is that once you do that, you have a unique perspective and unique set of skills, so that you can make bigger contributions or make contributions in areas where other people would not be able to. So like I had a student, Joe DeGaulle, who was doing robotics and computer vision. And he was working on like a couple different projects. And I think it might have taken him like 3 or 4 years to get his first paper published. But he was making good progress on everything. It was just that it was very broad. His interests were pretty broad. And by the time he graduated, he had several good papers and was really well positioned he got a job as a Microsoft researcher. And I think it worked out well for him. So I think it's just, you need to be, I think that everybody involved, if you're doing an interdisciplinary research, needs to be aware that it does, like, things will go slower in the beginning. But I think that at the end, the outcome can be, it can have a really good outcome. Yeah. The other thing is that you need, if you're doing, you need to make sure that you're working with people that are very familiar with each area, not necessarily that like, for example, you had one person in HCI and one person in AI, because it's, because nobody can be like, have super deep knowledge in multiple areas, or at least not until they're, have been doing research for many, many years.
I have one question. So on the startups, how do you, I guess I'm just curious, how does that transition happen, or why does it happen? Is it like usually related to a project or a thesis? Is the transition difficult, or how is it, what are the challenges, I guess? How does it happen?
Well, it's not something that usually happens, but so the way that I looked at it was, I guess like what so my path anyway was that I was kind of interested in doing a startup. I thought it would be an interesting experience, but I didn't want to do it for its own sake, and I definitely didn't want to do it by myself. And what I wanted to do was to make some kind of practical impact with computer vision. So I was thinking about like going to Amazon for a sabbatical or something and doing robotics there, or doing working on autonomous driving or something like that. But then I had been working with Mani Gopalvar in civil engineering on like applying vision to construction, and our work got noticed, and like construction companies were super interested in it, and they were asking us if this would become available to them. And then also like I meanwhile learned about like how much need there was for improving productivity in construction, and how much like computer vision could help. So it seemed like we had a really interesting and unique opportunity to directly make a difference with our research. And so that's what led me to do a startup. I think like one thing to note is that startups require, it's a very different, well, it's not very different, but it requires a broad range of skills. So there's like the engineering aspect and innovation and selling your work and raising money. That's all related to being a professor as well. But then there's, you have to sell stuff to customers, you have to market, you have to manage in a different way, like a more, a little bit more of a highly structured management if you're managing development. And so there's a lot of skills that you won't have as a student or as a professor. And it's important to try to identify people early that have those skills and work with them if you have an idea for a startup. So I think the way that I would think about it is that if you're thinking about doing a startup is like, do I have more opportunity for impact by doing this startup than I would have by like joining some research company or doing some other alternative, joining a research group at a company or doing an alternative thing. And I guess you also need to be aware that a startup is very high risk. So not that it's not like high risk like skiing, but it's high risk in the sense that it's likely to fail. So you need to have a high tolerance for risk, and it's a little bit more intense. I think it's more intense than doing a PhD or being a professor, because if things are going well, then you raise money and you have like short time frames for showing your progress in business before you have to raise money again. And so it's kind of like a accelerated, it's kind of like an accelerated PhD in a way, in that you have to keep on, demonstrating, keep on like putting out new things, except that it's much more complicated because you're also interacting with customers and investors, and you have like a much larger, much larger problem to solve. So another question was, how often do I find myself discarding ideas? Have I ever found myself discarding too many ideas while looking for a great one? So when I was like in the later stages of my PhD and early stages of being a professor, anytime I had an idea, I would usually write it. I'd kind of do this whole thing. So I'd write like a page on it or so. And I would probably only pursue like 10% of my ideas. So I have a lot of ideas that I would discard. And it's partly just that when I come back to it, it doesn't seem as exciting as it did when I first thought about it. And sometimes it was other people that dissuaded me from this idea. Now it's a little harder for me to quantify it now, because I get students come to me with ideas. Sometimes I have ideas that I try to get students interested in. So I don't have like a huge list of ideas, like a backlog of ideas that I'm like filtering through anymore. But I think usually if I'm working, a lot of times if I work with the new student, I'll try to come up, try to brainstorm like 3 or 4 ideas with them, and then we'll like talk about them and then pick one of them. So I think it's always good to have like some more than one idea that you're talking about. And I don't think I've really discarded too many because I never feel like I have extra time to do another project. So for master's students, do you have any good suggestions on how to verify whether the new idea is valuable or not? I think it depends what you're trying to do. So if your goal is to like engineer an application really well, then it just needs to be, you want to check, is it, I would maybe just get advice from some people about, is what you're trying to do possible? And is your like initial idea, like some professors or senior students might be able to say whether it's possible and whether your initial idea is likely to work. If you're trying to, and you need to think about like, will somebody else care about this, so that when you show your prospective employers that they'll like it. If you're trying to do a paper, or if you're trying to do more academic research, then again, I guess I would just get advice. Just ask somebody if you can talk to them about your idea for like 15 minutes, and if they would give you honest feedback on whether they think it's an interesting idea or not. It's pretty hard to come up with ideas. It requires a lot of knowledge, a lot of like understanding of state of the art. And so, so I wouldn't feel bad. I don't think anyone should feel bad if if they hear from somebody that, oh, actually this has already been done, or, you know, actually I think it's not, it's kind of superseded by other work that's been done. But I think as a master's student, probably the best thing is to get advice from somebody, because other people already have that expertise, most likely to give you some good feedback. Yep, and I think I sent the slides to Brando already, so he might be able to make them available.
Yes, we can make that available, and the video too later.
And as an undergraduate, so what you want to do is to find a research group, I think. So you can reach out to professors, and different professors do things different ways. Some of them might work with a lot of undergraduates. Some of them might not work with any. It depends on the style of their research and like on their time availability and how they've structured their group. So like for me, I've gone through like many different ways of doing things myself. What I currently do is I have a research group, and if anybody says that they're interested, I say, okay, sure, come to the research group. And right now it's on Zoom, so that's pretty easy. And then we spend some time just like kind of doing like a stand-up, like quick update on what people are doing. And then like every now and then somebody will spend like 10 or 15 minutes talking about their project, and then I can do some one-on-ones after. So that makes it a little bit easier for like, if somebody wants to just see like kind of what the group is doing without making a commitment, or without me making a commitment, that makes it kind of easy. But different research groups work different ways. So I would just contact professors doing things that you're interested in and say, hey, is there anything that I can get involved in, or can I join your group meetings or something like that? Yeah, it's a little harder these days, because normally in the past, my response would often be, oh, just like come by the lab and talk to my students, and they'll tell you what they're doing. I guess with the group meetings we do, it's also okay, but some professors might not have like set up something that's an easy way to engage remotely yet.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Professor. I think we'll make that the last question just to respect your time, and because Zoom fatigue is a real thing. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing it. But yeah, thank you so much for having, spending some time and sharing us your insights. I think it was really helpful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming too. I really appreciate it. I hope it was helpful to everyone.
Bye.
Bye.